You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back into a brand new episode, Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast here on the Locked On NFL Network, your team every day from the South Stands to the end zone. I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, Broncos analyst for the Locked On Network and 9 News, joined alongside my awesome co-host, Sayre Bedinger, Broncos analyst for the Locked On Network and 9 News, as well as the site expert for Predominantly Orange of the Fan-Sided Network. And we are here bringing you daily Broncos news content and coverage to keep you in the loop on the team that you root for on Sunday. Sayre, we got a lot to talk about today. Some Broncos news and notes, 2 Broncos placed on the NFL Top 100 list, and could the Broncos make the fullback position great again on the offense? I'm very excited to break all that down with you here today.
I'm excited, Cody. I love it. We just finished our first game week of the year, and here we are. We're into the groove, man. Another preseason game this week. Some exciting things to talk about. It's going to be a fun week, man. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, the Broncos, they had a closed practice today. Media was only allowed to attend. No fans. Training camp access for fans continues tomorrow, Wednesday, and Thursday before the team has a walkthrough on Friday. That's not available to media or anybody before they take off for Seattle on Saturday. But, Sayre, getting into our Broncos news notes, this was something that kind of got lost in the shuffle with all the stuff going on with joint training camp practices, some injuries. But last week, George Paton had mentioned that Tim Patrick, the Ravens had called about Tim Patrick and maybe his availability on the trade block. And it was kind of concerning because we saw him return to practice for a day. Then he didn't return back to practice. He didn't play in Saturday's game against the Vikings. So I think that Broncos fans have expressed their concern. Could Tim Patrick potentially be on his way out? I mean, I have my thoughts on it that I'll share, but I wanted to hear yours about this news in general. Should Broncos fans be concerned about maybe Tim Patrick leaving before the season begins?
I think maybe a little bit, at this point, he's been held out for quite a bit of time. And so, again, I'll bring up my, the conspiracy theorist in me wants to look at that and just say, well, just routine, he's one of those starter players that's just getting some kind of scheduled time off. But, it does make you wonder, why are they holding him out like this? And I think that we've seen KJ Hamler really step up, and we mentioned that on a previous show. KJ Hamler really stepping up, showing some consistency, being able to stay out there at practice, being able to do his thing for a consistent period of time, exactly what Vic Fangio said that he wanted to see from Hamler. I think that's critical in all this, in this whole discussion. We know that Courtland Sutton is going to come back and be wide receiver 1. We know that Jerry Jeudy is primed and ready for a wide receiver 2 role this year, maybe leading the team in targets. KJ Hamler looks ready to make a big impact. Noah Fant, obviously. The list goes on and on. You can go up and down the list. We've even talked about Eric Saubert as a potential option in the passing game. So I think if you're looking at the situation with Tim Patrick, 1 year, just roughly $3 million, ish on his contract, right, as a restricted free agent that he signed that deal earlier in the offseason. If you're a team in the NFL that needs a wide receiver, and there are plenty, you're looking at that contract and the player, and you're saying, man, that is actually really, really enticing. And you could get into, as the preseason goes along, I think you could get into some teams getting into a potential bidding war for Tim Patrick. And the Broncos even being able to say, hey, Tim, here's a list of teams that are interested in acquiring you. We want to give you the best opportunity to go and have success. This is going to be their top 4 receivers in the offense this year. Tim Patrick could potentially go be wide receiver, in New Orleans, wide receiver 1, arguably, and wide receiver 2 at worst in a number of other places. So I think if you look at the situation from the Broncos perspective, from Tim Patrick's perspective, from other team perspective, there's really no better time than now or in the next couple of weeks that the Broncos could actually realistically trade him and get best value in return.
I think you make a lot of great points. I'll play devil's advocate here. I think the only concern that I have with the timeline of this interest peaking for Tim Patrick being right now is that we're still way too early before the regular season even begins. So for me, what if an injury happens, right? And then all of a sudden you lose out on Tim Patrick. Now, I think it goes back to what we talked about with the wide receiver depth there. Trinity Benson obviously has shown that he can play. Can Seth Williams potentially play? Can Tyree Cleveland bounce back? Could he be one of those guys? Because that was the thought process in my head, is with all the talk about Tyree Cleveland last year in training camp and some of the flashes that we saw, I viewed Tyree as maybe the guy that could eventually come in and replace Tim Patrick. So maybe that might be on the table. But then, like I said, we talked about in yesterday's episode of the show, Tyree has to show us more. It was a pretty disappointing show for his first preseason game. And obviously, we'll see what roster cuts happen. Obviously, by Tuesday, 2:00 p.m. Mountain Time is when the Broncos have to go from 90 to 85. But I think those are some great points. In Broncos country, let us know in the comment section down below your thoughts on whether or not you believe that the Broncos, I mean, I think they could do really well by Tim. You mentioned Sutton's return, Judy, with the emergence of KJ, Noah, as you mentioned, it's really hard. And we had this conversation, who gets touches? So maybe George Payton, we've seen him do it with Philip Lindsay, might give Tim Patrick the best opportunity to maybe secure a long-term contract with another team. I know I like Tim Patrick. I'd love to see just him and Courtland Sutton, their size on opposite sides of the field together. But, the NFL is one of those tough businesses. So it's definitely something we're going to keep our eye on. But, Sayre, there's also another Broncos starter that is dealing with a little bit of an injury that was kind of surprising. But Vic Fangio says it's not expected to do anything or even really hold him out, but something they're keeping an eye on. And Melvin Gordon has a little bit of a groin injury. And we've seen several players have groin injuries now. Tim Patrick was one. Melvin was one. We had various other players coming up with that. And also, you have Mike Boone with the quad, some soft tissue. And this is the time of the year where we see the hot takes that the Broncos training staff doesn't have these guys right. I just want to say that is the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Lauren Landau gets these guys well prepared, and Mario Vitanza gets these guys well adjusted. This is just football. This is what happens when you combine being really fast and sizable in a contact sport.
100%. That's the case. And I think that, as we talked about before, at the running back position, you've really got to potentially look for some extra bodies. So like you said, the injury update on Melvin Gordon was a bit surprising. I think obviously now you've got Mike Boone potentially missing the first couple of weeks of the regular season. Now you've got Levante Bellamy dealing with an ankle injury. So I think that you've got to look into some potential reinforcements there. And right now they should be pretty readily available. I mean, out on the waiver wire as teams are cutting down to 85 guys, or just even in the free agent market in general. So we know that running backs kind of come across the wire all the time. And so I think the Broncos would be wise to maybe get somebody in there now, get him some time to get up to speed on the offense and really be available as, potential backup option, practice squad option for the future.
Yeah, something to keep an eye on. But yeah, my concern about the Broncos running back depth has definitely been documented here on the podcast. And, I think if anything, we are going to see a lot more Royce Freeman here in the preseason. I wouldn't be surprised if we see Royce get the start. I'm okay, Sayre, at this point of saying, hey, we saw enough from, Javonte Williams in his first preseason game. I don't want to put him out there and risk anything else. So I would be very shocked, honestly, if we see Javonte play. But then again, I mean, the mindset from what I gathered from Vic talked about, we still consider this player as a young guy. So that's why they played them. So maybe it makes sense. Maybe we'll see a little bit of Javonte, but me personally, I would sit him because, okay, hey, let's have he and Melvin Gordon be one of the most dynamic duos in the league potentially on paper. That's my goal and my hope there. But Broncos country coming up here in just a moment. 2 Denver Broncos players were named to the NFL Top 100 players heading into 2021. Which players were they? And also, could another Bronco make the list? Sayre and I were going to discuss, and we're going to reflect on what we heard on the NFL Network's presentation coming up here in just a moment. But before we do that, let me tell you about one of the sponsors of today's episode of the show. That's our good friends over there, betonline.ag. And BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all of your sports action. The Denver Broncos are on the road this week, taking on the Seattle Seahawks, and BetOnline has you covered with all the sporting news, odds, and info that you need to make the best informed decisions with your lineups and where you put your money on the line. So you don't have to sit on the sidelines anymore, as the NFL season is fast approaching here with preseason and then the NFL regular season opener all the way on September 9th. BetOnline has you covered. And I want you to head to the website or use your mobile device today. And when you sign up, you can get 50% off your first deposit bonus when you use promo code LOCKEDON. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts. All right, Sayre, the NFL Top 100 Players of 2021. Really, this isn't a list that's accumulated by coaches and by players, mainly put together by players. And surprisingly enough, 2 Denver Broncos, we already know who they are. Apparently, there's one more Bronco on the list. We'll get to that here in a little bit. But Garett, Bolles, and Justin Simmons made the list. In the NFL's format, they usually would go by an episodic approach. Instead, they released 100 all the way through 40. So it was jam-packed programming on the NFL Network. But Garett Bolles comes in at number 82, and Justin Simmons comes in at number 45, which last year he wasn't even on the list. So this is huge. First off, let's talk about Garett Bolles. In your opinion, Sayre, what was it like just really seeing Garett Bolles get nominated? That we got to hear about his peers, guys that he's gone against, really have some high praise for him.
It's awesome. It's just really awesome to see. Garett Bolles didn't obviously get quite the fanfare that MVP candidate Josh Allen got last year, but I think, when you're talking about just a ridiculous leap in play, Garett Bolles maybe improved more than any other player in the entire NFL last year. So honestly, surprising not to see him get more love for that award as well. So Bolles, what else can be said about him? I mean, the fact that early on in his career, it looked like maybe his only redeeming quality was availability. And then to go out there at last season and just look like arguably the best left tackle in the game, really improved. I know that obviously a lot of people want to point to the fact that the NFL wasn't calling a ton of holding penalties last season, but even considering that, you could tell that Bolles' technique was much better. His core strength vastly improved. His hand placement vastly improved. Lots of things that you can see he's really taken to the coaching of Mike Munchak, which is an underrated thing, because I think that for Garett Bolles, a lot of the disconnect for him was the inability to really let the coaching that he was getting from guys like Sean Kugler and others really click. And not to say that Sean Kugler and those other coaches weren't good at what they do. I think he's done a fine job in Arizona. But Mike Munchak coming in, really working with Bolles, great to see the improvement. Great to hear the praise from his peers around the league. And obviously a top 100 rating. That's no small deal. So really excited for Bolles and what it means for the future of the team, the fact that he took that step forward.
Oh, yeah, coming off of an all-pro season. Here's the thing, too, regarding Garett, that, look, Sayre, you mentioned that there are people out there that are going to say, well, the NFL, they were down on holding calls last year. Who cares? Here's the deal. The Broncos saw enough on tape, and I've watched enough all 22 tape of Garett Bolles from the 2020 NFL season to know exactly what you were talking about, Sayre, that he improved so much in so many different areas of his game. Not only just his mental approach to it, but the physical side, the technical aspect. You mentioned hand placement. Now, often at times what we see with wide stunts by defensive lines, he has to account for the guy that's going to come to the quarterback nearest first, right? So, for example, if he has a guy lined up on the inside part of his shoulder, he and Dalton Risner have to double team initially, but then he has to pass off that guy on the inside and account for the guy coming off the outside edge there, because that is his responsibility in that one-on-one. He's going to have to adjust to that, or else that guy's going to come around and bend and hit the quarterback. We saw Garett Bolles bury dudes. I'm talking about clubs like even Shaquille Barrett, Jason Pierre-Paul. There was a play where he clubbed a dude in the head and then buried him in the run game. We saw it against the Miami Dolphins, burying Byron Jones. He's a physical guy. He loves to play like that, but he's playing more in control, and he's allowing the game to come to himself. His footwork has improved. One thing I noticed when he struggled, his feet were wider than his entire base. Now you see it when he steps laterally, he's adjusting with his other foot coming over. So he's keeping an even keel in his base, which is perfect for his balance. For me, I feel like if you take away Alex Smith from last year, maybe you can make an argument that Garett Bolles could have been a comeback player of the year, because he was written off. The Broncos had declined his fifth-year option, and all of us were sitting there at that time. We're saying, hey, we're in a really dire straits here with how we're going to cover this team, because the Broncos aren't going to have a left tackle. They're not going to have a right tackle. And now all of a sudden the Broncos have their left tackle for the next 4 years. I love that for Garett. He earned it. And there's another guy that earned a contract too, and luckily George Payton delivered, and that's Justin Simmons, who comes in at number 45 on this list on the NFL top 100 players. And Sayre, my general takeaway from watching the segment on Justin Simmons, hearing him talk about what goes through his head pre-snap and how he likes to look at what quarterbacks are doing, and based on his alignment, how he can throw different looks to throw them off. And it goes back to that Fitzpatrick play where he intercepted the pass to win the game. He noticed it was out of a too high shell, and he cheated over to the side of the single receiver to where it showed like they were doubling that Z guy. And then he rotated before pre-snap all the way to the middle of the field. He jumped it, interception, game over. And not even this, the Fitzpatrick thing's impressive, hearing how he talks about the defense. But I want to talk about the praise that Patrick Mahomes had for him. I mean, that was something in and of itself.
It was really cool, man. It was such a cool segment. I loved the piece about, the Ryan Fitzpatrick game-winning interception that he got off him. But yeah, the Mahomes play was really fascinating to get a look inside of Simmons' brain, and for him to be able to have recalled in real time a specific thing that he had seen on tape. I think it was against the 49ers.
Yep.
That he said it was from Patrick Mahomes. So the same type of rollout. And actually, now having seen that segment from Justin Simmons, I actually saw PJ Walker do almost the exact same thing in the Panthers preseason game on a touchdown pass that he threw against the Indianapolis Colts. But really, really cool to see Justin Simmons be able to recall that to mind and to say, all right, I got to get to a spot now, because I see him doing the exact same thing. I've seen this throw on tape. I know that he's going to try to get it to the corner, and he just was right there, and that's in that exact spot. And Mahomes was kind of like, you know what? Got to give it to him, man. I mean, I thought nobody else was going to be able to get that ball except for Tyreek. But man, Justin Simmons, just as smart as he is, freakishly athletic, and tremendous, tremendous hands. Even Travis Kelce had to shout out the hands of Justin Simmons, man. And he is good. He can catch the ball, and he's just been one of the best players in the league over the course of the last 5 years at getting his hands on the football. That's such an underrated trait of his, which is pretty amazing. The fact that, he's handsy out there. He's long, he's athletic, he's handsy, and he's really, really smart. So just an awesome segment overall, but really cool to hear the praise from the defending AFC champions too.
Well, you even hear too from national media members, they're talking about guys like Minkah Fitzpatrick, Jesse Bates, but guess who came in ahead of all those guys on this list as voted on by peers? And I think that there is a legitimate argument as to Justin Simmons making a claim that he is arguably the best safety in the NFL, because look, he's not just a free safety guy, which was interesting because Minkah Fitzpatrick, he even said he just wants to play free. He's not the guy that's going to come down and play against the run. Justin Simmons, he does all that. He plays free. He comes up into the box and plays a strong safety type role. And he's so good at understanding that and identifying things pre-snap, getting guys aligned. To me, that signifies a guy that is very cerebral. Obviously, George Paton came in and right away said, hey, our first priority is getting Justin Simmons locked up, and he did that, and I'm super excited to watch him this upcoming season. Now, Sayre, the NFL Network says that there's one more Bronco on the list. The only person I can think of that can maybe get consideration from it is Bradley Chubb, or it could be Von Miller, but then again, Von didn't play a game last year. We see this happen, though, all the time in the NFL top 100, but if we're basing it off of last season, at this point, where we're getting to the point where it's 39 all the way to 1, Bradley Chubb probably is the only guy if we're basing it off of last year.
Yeah, I agree with you there. I think you could make a case for Bryce Callahan if they weren't really considering games.
True.
Callahan is probably up there, but at the same time, I think Chubb getting a Pro Bowl nod last year, despite the injury at the beginning of the season that he's recovering from, and then that he was dealing with at the end of the season that we've kind of been watching the Broncos monitor throughout this offseason. So I can't wait to get a fully healthy Bradley Chubb and fully healthy Von Miller on the same field. I think that that's going to be incredibly fun to watch. But I think you're right. He's deserving of a spot on there. We kind of saw him start off a little bit slow last season in terms of just coming back from that knee injury. Maybe he was a little bit hesitant. Maybe they were just kind of easing him back in. But whatever the case may be, I think it was in that Jets game that he kind of got the favorable matchup with Mekhi Becton really being out himself or injured himself and then getting knocked out of the game early. I think that really activated something in Chubb to say, all right, now's my opportunity to just be aggressive, pin my ears back, be aggressive, and make some plays. And that momentum really carried for as long as he was healthy for the rest of the season. So he'd definitely be deserving of a spot on this list. I don't know. Higher than Justin Simmons, higher than Garett Bolles. That's really something for whoever they pick for that spot. Yeah.
So we're going to continue to monitor that. But Broncos country coming up here in just a moment. Sayre and I are going to talk about the Broncos fullback position and how it could be used heavily in the offense this year. But before we do that, let me tell you about the two other sponsors of today's episode of the show. Our good friends over there, rockauto.com and Stat Hero. Rockauto.com. If you need anything for your car or truck, they have everything that you could be looking for. All the parts that you need in one place. Safe, easy, reliable, and they can even deliver it directly to your doorstep. With all these local auto chain stores out there, they tend to only carry specific parts, specific brands, only from the warehouses that their company chooses from. With rockauto.com, you get access to a multitude of brands and parts, and you get everything that you need delivered directly to your doorstep. Not to mention prices at rockauto.com are always reliably low, and they're the same for professionals and do-it-yourselfers. So why don't you go to rockauto.com right now, here today, and see all the parts available for your car or truck, right? Locked On Broncos in there. How did you hear about us box? So that they know that we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need, rockauto.com. And our good friends over there at Stat Hero. And ladies and gentlemen, did you know that 85% of people who play daily fantasy sports lose? I'm very guilty of that. I've lost a lot. And is it really that surprising? Well, the reality is you have the deck stacked against you every single time you play because the game is rigged against you. You're playing against thousands of other lineups, not to mention you're playing against experts who have more tools and more time, and you don't stand a chance. Introducing Stat Hero, it is the first ever daily fantasy sports book that puts the player in control and within winning reach. That's easy because here's the deal. Stat Hero reveals to you their lineups and allows you to make adjustments ahead of time. You name your stakes, winner take all, you have the advantage, and Stat Hero is showing you their lineups like I mentioned. Nobody else out there does that. You are in total control, and Stat Hero is DFS the way it was meant to be, one-on-one. So play Stat Hero now and change the odds. Go to stathero.com/lockedon, sign up for free, and right now you can get 3 times back on your first play. They're giving you 300% match. That's unheard of. Go to stathero.com/lockedon, stathero.com/lockedon. But Sayre, let's get into our fourth quarter conversation here on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Just a reminder, this podcast is available in audio format on your favorite podcasting platforms, not to mention here on YouTube in video format. So if you have friends or family who are Broncos fans, let them know about Locked On Broncos, because Sayre and myself, we're going to bring you daily objective coverage of every angle of what's going on with the team. You're not going to get none of this overreaction, hot take BS. We don't do that over here. We break down the game in every single way, shape, and form on the team that you root for on Sundays, the team that wears orange and blue. But with that said, Sayre, the fullback position was something we didn't see too much of last year for the Broncos. They had a fullback whose name was technically Andrew Beck, and he provided value as a little bit of a blocker, a guy who's going to kick guys out and also be a seal guy, but also as a receiver. Now, I'm starting to feel like with what we've seen from Adam Prentice so far in training camp and even in preseason game number 1, he had a really dang good game, in my opinion. I feel like the Broncos, if they're going to utilize a lot of play action, if they want to run the ball more, I think Adam Prentice might have a really big part in that this upcoming season.
I think so too, Cody. And I think you're spot on with that. You know, we saw Pat Shurmur really let that position disintegrate from his offense last year. Not necessarily from his offense, but the Broncos offense, you know, with Rich Scangarello calling the plays. The fullback was pretty heavily featured. You know, in fact, we saw a really big boost in the running game when Andy Janovich was injured at the beginning of the season and then came back into the lineup. I believe it was against the Chargers. The running game really opened up for the Broncos in that particular game back in 2019. So then in 2020, you pretty much just write that position out of the script entirely. And I think that Pat Shurmur has now seen the need for it, you know, especially with his personnel. You've got to play. We've seen this how many times, Cody, with Broncos offensive coordinators kind of shuffling in and out over the last 5-6 years. How many times have we seen square pegs trying to be fit into round holes all the time by these offensive coordinators? You know, it just doesn't work always to just, okay, here's my offense. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to do what I've always done. And, you know, screw the personnel, screw the players that we've got here. We're going to run my offense. Well, I think Pat Shurmur maybe went back to the drawing board at the end of the 2020 season and said, all right, man, we were really, really good off of play action. So what does that mean that we have to do with our offense going forward? That means that we've got to really run the ball well. So you saw the Broncos go out and get Javonte Williams. You know, you get Mike Boone. You bring in a fullback after the draft, which, by the way, is the best time to do it because that's where the best fullbacks are, just like kickers, just like punters, just like all these other specialist positions. You can get really good players after the draft. So, and Adam Prentice in specific, we saw him get really heavily involved in the game plan in the first game. And I think the reason why for that, Cody, is because, like you said, I think they're really interested in having this guy be part of the offense. And I don't know that that's ultimately going to be the case. I think we need to continue to see impact from him in game situations. But man, I think the first game and the things that we had heard about in training camp from Prentice when the pads went on, I think all of that combined leads me to believe that Pat Shurmur realized the need for the fullback in the specific offense that he has with the specific personnel that he has.
When I go back to 22 personnel, we saw quite a bit of that in the Broncos game against the Vikings. And so you had your 2 tight end guys in, but you also had a 2 running backs. You had a running back and then you had the fullback in Prentice. And so one thing that stood out to me, Sayre, and I don't know if you caught this, but on the play action pass that was 80 yards downfield to KJ Hamler, You saw Eric Sauber and you saw Adam Prentice both double teaming number 91, who came off because really what happens at play action, Drew Lock was under center. He opens up to his left, fakes the handoff to the left, rolls out to his right, and usually that's where the backside pressure is going to be coming free. So you really need to have good protection there. We saw tight end fullback protection there. We allowed the offensive lineman to crash down the tackle, to crash down on the defensive end, and then you had the other guy free, but he was double teamed by two guys. Number 91, I believe it was Stephen Weatherly, if I'm not mistaken, of the Vikings, and then allowed Drew Lock to set his feet in that pocket and then throw it downfield to KJ. That was an issue that we saw with the Broncos last year. We knew that Drew Lock statistically was better off of play action. However, how many times did we see pressure coming into his face off play action and him still throwing off that back foot? We didn't see that in week 1 of the NFL preseason. Can Drew continue to do that? I think that what the Broncos can do, and West Coast offenses specifically, they've always had a fullback, right? You look at Mike Shanahan's offense. He's always had a fullback, a guy that can help the run game and also help out in pass protection. You go back to the depths there when Andy Janovich was still dominating. The Broncos had a pretty good run game with Jano, and they also had pretty good pass protection because of Jano as well as a tight end. I think it gives the Broncos more opportunity to be successful offensively. Last year, I just didn't see that dynamic there with Andrew Beck. We knew what he was, but it also allows you to get your running back involved off the play action as a receiver, not necessarily as a pass protection guy when you have 22 personnel in. So, Sayre, I agree. I hope that Pat Shurmur really embraces a guy like Adam Prentice. Look, his size is there. I don't think he's going to necessarily be the impact guy out of the backfield as a receiving fullback, but here's the deal. I don't think you need him to be with the options that you have, because you can have 2 wide receivers. You can have a running back swinging out. It's a 3-man route concept out of that personnel, and we saw the Broncos get open with this several times. So I would not oppose to that, Sayre.
Definitely. And circling it all back to the Tim Patrick discussion, if that's going to be your plan, a lot, like you said, a little bit more 22 personnel, a little bit more 12 personnel, a little bit more involvement from the fullback, a little bit more involvement from multiple tight ends, I think you could kind of circle that all back together and say, okay, if we're not going to use three wide receivers all the time, we may have an opportunity here to cash in some value. So it's not necessarily a straight up trade of Tim Patrick for the fullback position exactly, but you kind of get where I'm going with that. If you're going to use that a little bit more, that maybe frees you up a little bit on that side of things as well.
No, it's an exciting development to watch. And look, Broncos practice at training camp continues all week long here at the UCL Training Center. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday practices open to the public, and I hope you're able to attend there, enjoy watching it. But after what we've seen in the game, I hope Broncos Country can settle down a little bit on the whole practice based on the tempo there and what's going on. I think that Broncos fans are a little happier. But and the preparation begins now for the Seattle Seahawks. Hopefully the Broncos can get a few guys back healthy. But Sayre and I, we're going to keep you guys covered here, Locked On Broncos. And tomorrow you're going to hear from Sayre, myself, and Tim Jenkins as he goes through, and he's already broken down the Broncos game. He's going to give us some insight to quarterbacks from a mechanics standpoint, from an operations of the huddle, from a concept standpoint. We're going to hear Tim Jenkins' thoughts on both Teddy Bridgewater and Drew Lock, how they did in this quarterback competition and what he's got his eye on for the Seattle Seahawks. But you can get that on tomorrow's episode of Locked On Broncos. Make sure you subscribe or follow on your favorite audio podcasting platform here on the YouTube channel. I'm Cody Roark, host of the show, speaking for my amazing co-host, Sayre Bedinger. We're going to see you tomorrow for a brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.